Hey, good morning to you and happy Monday. Hey, there's something that I was just reading through, and as many of you know, I've talked about this in the past, but I really like to read a Proverbs a day, and I was reading yesterday, and I wanted to bring something forth to you today as we start our week together. So here it is, Proverbs 25:15. This is what it says, and I think it's so relevant to what we're doing in our nation right now. Through patience, a ruler can be persuaded, and a gentle tongue can break a bone. Some translations there will say, through forbearance, a ruler can be persuaded. And, you know, of course, we're living in these historically significant moments. I believe, you know, a Supreme Court justice set to be confirmed this week. And also, of course, you know, no secret, the election is right around the corner. And so there's many significant, monumental decisions being made in our nation as far as leadership and in government. And even when we look out, there's more at stake here than government decisions, because we're living in this really significant period of history as the Church of America. And so I want to talk about that a little bit this morning, because, you know, there's many things going on around us, many things that bring turbulence and unsteadiness and all of these things that are calling out our name. And what's fascinating, I was thinking so much this morning about how forbearance changes the heart of a prince. Some translations will say that. This one says patience, a ruler. And so what's fascinating to me is that through patience, you know, I always think of, you probably learned it in elementary school, but it's like the tortoise and the hare, you know, and the hare is like off and running, and the tortoise is just very steady, very rhythmic, methodical, you know, day after day takes a step, very intentional. And I really believe that there's a strong parallel right now, even looking biblically. America is not, you know, we're not in a season that many other nations, Israel included, haven't been before. And I think that brings, one, peace and comfort to my heart. And so I hope it brings peace and comfort to your heart, because I was reading in Ezra this morning. And so if you happen to have your Bible this morning, turn to Ezra. But what's fascinating is I really believe, so in Ezra, in the day of Ezra, they were rebuilding this temple. And it was actually a physical temple. It was a temple dedicated to the Lord. And it had been completely obliterated. And so they were trying to rebuild this temple. And so we come to Ezra 4, and I feel like this is such a parallel to where we are as a nation right now. Because in Ezra 4, it literally talks about, look at verse 1. When the enemies of Judah and Benjamin heard that the exiles were building a temple for the Lord, the God of Israel, they came to Zerubbabel and to the heads of the families and said, "Let us help you, because like you, we seek your God and have been sacrificing to him since the time of the king of Assyria brought us here." Okay, so they're rebuilding the temple. So in America, I really believe in a lot of ways, like it or not, the Church of America is changing, right? We can clearly see this. The Church of America is under a major shift, and there's much rebuilding going on. You know, unless the Lord builds a house, the laborers labor in vain. And so there's all this chaos and things that want to bring us out of that peace, want to bring us out of that rest, want to bring us out of hearing the voice of the Lord and rebuilding the Church of America. However, the Lord is speaking so clearly to his prophets, and we're going to look at that in just a minute. But what's going on here? So they're rebuilding the temple, and the quote unquote enemies, okay, come and say, "Hey, we want to rebuild with you. Like, we'll help you. We want to come alongside you. We want to rebuild with you." And so they use their discernment here, right? And so this is what they say: "You have no part with us in building a temple to our God. We alone will build it for the Lord, the God of Israel, as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, has commanded us. So in their discernment, they're like, okay, you're not for us, like you're against us. And I really felt like the Lord like just spoke to me in that moment and said, Christy, be careful who you're building with. And this isn't to create, suspicion and paranoia, but listen, we're in this monumental season as the Church of America and in our cities. And not everyone who says they're for us and wants to build with us is for us, right? The enemy purposefully and strategically brings people who say they want to build with us who are not for us. And so in our discernment, we look at that. And so basically, I'm going to fast forward and be quick. Otherwise, I could give this whole teaching on Ezra that would take literally weeks and months. But what's crazy is these people pull away. They get mad. These enemies that said they were for him, and they said, no way, you're not building with us. So they pull away. They develop this strategy, and they send a letter to the governor, and basically they shut down the entire building of the temple. And so what's fascinating is, let's see here. What I think is so cool is the temple gets shut down. A letter is given to the governor, this strategy, the rebuilding of the temple gets shut down. And so strategically, there's 2 prophets that come here. And so when these prophets come, in Ezra 6:14, this is what it says. So the elders of the Jews continued to build and prosper under the preaching of Haggai the prophet and Zechariah. And so what's fascinating, and what I want you to catch, okay, so in 4:24, thus the work on the house of the God in Jerusalem came to a standstill. Okay, so the enemy looked like they succeeded. It looks like this enemy that has come and written a letter to the governor, they've succeeded in this thing. The building of the temple gets shut down. But God, but God, it says in chapter 5, and this is so important, it says, but the eye of their God was watching over the elders, and they were not stopped until a report could go. And so what's so fascinating is that the enemies, follow these governmental things and shut it down, but God's eye is watching on them. If you watched the last Momentum Monday, we talked about the eye of providence, the eye of God, all of these things. And so the eye of God is over this nation, and he's watching. So what does he do? He literally stirs in the heart of these 2 prophets, Zechariah and Haggai, and releases this prophetic unction in them. And I think it's really interesting, and I think it's very significant in this season, is that these prophets literally, they called those things into being as if they were. Prophets are always those people who are going to see in the spirit and release to earth. So they see in heaven, they release it to earth. Prophets are always going to be the people that come on the scene when there's great discouragement, when there's great fear being stirred up, which is exactly what was going on in their day. There was great discouragement, great fear. Why is that? Why does God send prophets in that moment of history? Well, he sends them because prophets, they rarely look at the natural, and they more look at the spirit, and they bring it into the natural. We see this with Samuel, when he anointed David to be king, when he called out the sin of Saul, and he said, the Lord already kept me up all night, dude. I already know what you did, all of these things. And so what's so fascinating to me is these 2 prophets. The rebuilding of the temple had been totally shut down, and the Lord gives an unction to these 2 prophets, and they literally come on the scene, and they start calling into being from the spirit to the natural. And these 2 prophets are literally the ones that come on and turn over and begin stirring the heart of people. They begin releasing his spirit, and as they release, that it says in verse 14, so the elders of the Jew continued to build and prosper under the preaching of Haggai the prophet. And so what's so cool about this to me, and I believe this is so significant, is that this temple was completely rebuilt, this physical temple. It was shut down, and 70 years later, it was actually rebuilt. And what's amazing to me is I see such a parallel season in America that I really believe from one generation to the other, from the the early rain to the latter rain, I really believe that there have been prophets that have stood in the gap for the Church of America for decades, and they have called this thing out. They have called a return to His Spirit. They have called, where Ichabod has been hung on the door. They have called His glory and presence back into the Church of America. Prophets are being raised up in this day who will stand in the gap, who will look to heaven and release it to earth. And from that releasing, there's something that's stirring in the hearts of men and women. And I really believe in America that the temple, quote unquote, the temple, which we know in a New Testament hour is me and you, but the temple, right, is being reestablished and realigned, and His glory is returning like never before. And I encourage you today, we're all prophetic people. We may not be a prophet, right? But we're all prophetic people. And so I encourage you today to call those things into being as if they were. Because if Zechariah and Haggai would not have done that, if they would not have stood and fanned the flame in the hearts of those who are rebuilding, I don't know if the temple would have been rebuilt. But it was 70 years, just like God said, 70 years from it being shut down governmentally through a letter to the rebuilding. And so let's just pray this morning. And I really want to ask the Lord to supernaturally impart to you the faith that you need to call those things into being as if they were. And so, Father, I pray over every listener, over every heart, God. I ask, Lord, that you would give supernatural eyes, Lord, to release from heaven to earth. And God, where discouragement and fear wants to come in and mute that voice and silence that sound, I ask, oh God, that you would break every chain of discouragement, every chain of fear. I break doubt in Jesus' name. And I ask, oh God, that your Spirit would come forth boldly, Father, in the hearts of your prophets. Your prophets are always sent on the earth when you need to rebuild and there's not that thing going on in the natural, but you literally want to release heaven to earth. You send your prophets who will see in the Spirit, who will stand in that moment like Noah, who built an ark over the course of probably 150 years, day after day after day, because you spoke it in the heaven, He created it in the natural. And I believe we're in this season right now where you're speaking from heaven and you're releasing in the natural. But God, I ask that you would give us eyes to see. And I break every doubt that is coming against our faith. And God, I ask, like Hebrews 11, Father, that we would stand on great faith in these days for what you want to do, Lord, that you would set the harvest before us, God, that we would not take our eyes off of you in these days. I bless every listener, God. I pray for greater prophetic unction in their spirit to complete the assignment you've given them in their cities. Hey, I love you guys. I bless you. We continue to cry out for our nation. We're headed to Washington, D.C. here in just a few days. Can't wait to stand on the National Mall and intercede for our nation and for all God is doing. I hope you have a great week.